Good morning, everybody. I'm still at our Smart Freight Center US fall meeting here in Seattle. It's still beautiful weather out there, so this is Indian summer here. I have with me Tobias Bohnhoff from shipzero. He will talk in a minute for what shipzero is about and what he cares about. Shipzero has been a member and a partner of Smart Freight Center in the development of and deployment of tools that actually measure the carbon footprint and the carbon journey of shippers, of cargo owners, and other companies. So let's get started. I'm glad to have you here, and maybe you tell us a little bit about yourself and shipzero and what's your claim to fame.
Yeah, wonderful to be here, Christoph. It's really nice event so far. My name is Tobias Bohnhoff. I'm CEO and also co-founder of shipzero. As you rightly pointed out, we are basically on the data side of things when it comes to decarbonization, and shipzero basically has the mission to really enable decarbonization. Now, we are not engaging in any physical assets. We are not building any vehicles. We are not producing any fuel. So how does that work? We are really on the data side influencing the decision making to make this energy transition as quick and as efficient, cost efficient as possible for our clients. And there we work with logistics service providers, with carriers, but also with shippers. So among the entire spectrum of also Smart Freight Center participants or interest groups, basically we are engaging and helping in two main areas. One is this entire accounting and calculation part that you mentioned, also supported by frameworks such as GLAC. Before that, oftentimes a lot of data ingestion and data exchange needs to happen, also a topic where Smart Freight Center is heavily engaging. And then the second part, a little bit newer, is this entire market-based measures world of actually flexibilizing the possibility to say, okay, we record a sustainable intervention in the physical world, and we take the environmental attributes and we make it much more flexible on the business side to really scale decarbonization.
So I have learned over the last 3 years since I joined Smart Freight Center, so the tool providers is actually a core constituency of Smart Freight Center for many years. Yeah, this is how Smart Freight Center started 12 years ago. I mean, basically by setting this GLAC framework, you mentioned that already, 2014, and that actually became more and more refined. And what I, in hindsight, always find super impressive, actually, the companies that were part of the early part of the journeys, they did stick with that. Yeah, so there's a credibility, consistency being built, and then we were asked Alan Lewis and at the time Sophie Printer to help basically build the ISO standard, and then in a way that's broadened and scaled, and that's still basically the DNA, so to speak, the DNA of Smart Freight Center. And I think in the process, I think we helped as Smart Freight Center to build a whole community of tool providers, of companies that actually build tools in order to help shippers, etc. For those who are not in that directly, so that sometimes it's a bit abstract. So maybe you can give a few examples. So how does that work? I mean, how do you work with companies actually?
That's a good point, because I also have oftentimes the feeling that it's not quite easy to understand that, especially if you're completely new to the topic. And that's basically also, to put it very simply, I think the world in decarbonization is still quite foggy. You have so many different solutions, so many different providers, the different modes of transport, which all work slightly different. So as a sustainability professional, but also as a procurement or supply chain planning professional, you are basically standing a little bit in a foggy world. And what we try to do with shipzero is to provide the flashlight that basically brings some more certainty into the very next steps that you are taking on your journey, and ultimately, hopefully, also shines as wide as you can see also the horizon or where you want to go as a target. However, that is looking back into the last years, not that easy, because also the landscape is very dynamically changing. And I think this decision-making to take the next step is super crucial to get moving in the first place. So you know you need to have some certainty as an organization or also as an individual, because you put your reputation, your decision-making on the spot and that needs to be supported by some evidence that the data is giving you.
I think people get at a higher level why that all makes sense. So why you need data, etc. At Smart Frame Center, we have often a debate. Maybe you can shed a bit of light on that, on the use of primary data versus model data. Yeah. So I think there's people out there that say, okay, everything has to be primary database. Yeah, and then other maybe not. Yeah. So we have to be more specific. Maybe you can say a little bit on that and maybe give an example. I mean, for somebody who hasn't, if you come to a company and say, here is shipzero. So how do you work with them? So what do they get? How do they need to get prepared to deliver or to provide you all what you need to be successful with them?
Yeah, two very good questions. Let me start with the first. So I think there's a huge debate around what is the right granularity, accuracy of data to have the trust for the decision making. And on the other hand, obviously, how do I realistically scale into my global operations? Supply chain is spanning across the world, and I need some standardization or some simplification measurements where modeling is also very good option. And I would say we are at shipzero one of the first advocates for primary data, also one of the first tools, I think, accredited for a primary data methodology. On the other hand, I would also answer your question today with, of course, you need model data, because it doesn't make really sense today to say I scale it to 100%. That's most of the cases, or almost all of the cases that I've seen personally, prohibitively expensive. Now, I think there's one big topic that I would like to also address in this kind of format, which is a misconception or different definitions of primary data. I see many, especially on the shipper side, perceiving like first-hand data that they get from their direct suppliers defined as primary data, whereas this can also be very well a calculation based on glyc factors, defaults, so nothing from the original energy that was propelling the actual physical transport is here recorded. And that is a little bit of a problem in terms of how far are you, because obviously it's great to have this data exchange with your suppliers and get this first-hand data. But on the other hand, you have to qualify that it's also energy-based. That's at least our definition at shipzero, and I think that's aligning quite well also with the SFC definition, because then ultimately if you take the energy content that propels the transport, you can be very sure about the reduction and also the status quo of the emissions. And that's then a good bridge, basically, how do we help companies? So we engage with really a variety of different types of companies. But to give you one example, a larger multi-billion LSP, for example, has most likely very different IT systems around the globe. Maybe due to non-organic growth in the past, maybe due to decentral IT structures, legacy IT whatsoever. So the first thing that we do is basically to provide one ground truth place in the organization where all the different transport management systems, fleet management systems, fuel card systems basically that are around, feed their data in order to have this ground truth decision-making basis. And then obviously apply a lot of quality mechanisms on top of that to ensure that this is also reliable. Then there comes the calculation part. Obviously, you want to transform your activity or your energy data into something more tangible when it comes to emissions. And what do you do with those emissions? That's quite fluffy at sometimes. It's very hard to imagine what is a ton of CO2. You cannot see it.
So CO2e.
CO2e, yes, very good. And it's very difficult then also to put that into a specific use case, because that requires really the connects with the organization. It's not done with just putting the data into some place in the organization. You really have to work with concrete use cases, for example, for green freight procurement or tenders, for building maybe green freight products with carbon insets, or actually then defining a budget and decarbonization strategy around your scope 3 emissions in transportation, where you have a clear glide path, for example, following your science-based target.
So if you think about these 3 steps, so first of all, you need to make sure you collect the data. So collect the data, clean the data in a way, make them. Correct. Then you got a data repository. You bring calculation methodology into that, and then you have CO2e, etc. And then you apply those to use cases. So when it comes to your capacity, how do if I'm let's say a cargo owner or so and want to work with shipzero, so how do I have to picture the effort that I'm about to undertake?
Great question, and also difficult to answer, because I think the important aspect that you need to consider here is where are you in the journey or in the maturity stage. In the beginning, I think the vast majority of time and effort goes into this phase one of collecting the data, cleaning the data, having everything set up. The calculation part, the better the data is, the less effort flows into that part. Obviously, you need to standardize that, and you need to have some business logics that are tied to your own operations. That is also something that is, in the beginning, some effort. But ultimately, this shrinks down over time, and the more and more capacity will be freed off also in the organization for this last bit of actually working on the use cases and implementing certain measures. But in the very beginning, it's probably 80%, roughly 70 to 80% work really on the data, then calculating, and only little in the beginning for the use cases, because you are not really able to derive any good decisions from data that can be crap in the end. But this then completely shifts basically to the other way after you have implemented the system.
So insets or book and claim are one of the application cases. Maybe you said at the beginning, so this is important. Tell us a little bit more about how your approach or your angle towards book and claim, and how actually you work together with SFC on some of that.
Yes. So obviously, when I say our company mission is basically to enable decarbonization, that is not just putting data into some repository. That is not doing anything in terms of decarbonization, unfortunately. So what we need to do is obviously to have a direct connection to the physical world to some degree. And that is, as we are a data company, just by the recording and then giving all the trust into what do I get when I pay, for example, for something that claims to be a sustainable intervention. So book and claim, I think, is one key enabler at this point, also due to the fact that we need scale. I think that is one of the main themes at this conference on the past few days. We need scale, and we need the flexibility, because we need to reach a business case. We need to reach cost parity between the different options, because then it's a no-brainer to switch to the sustainable alternative. And that is something that we try to obviously accompany for our customers. And one practical example working with logistics service providers is they do these initiatives sometimes out of their own motivation, sometimes due to pressure of certain clients, but they need to have a marketable solution for that. They need to accurately record those interventions and build the trust that anyone else after that in the chain can actually record that into their greenhouse gas protocol or into their greenhouse gas inventory. And therefore, obviously, it's super critical that we have also a consensus of how this system needs to work. And I think that's a great connection to SFC, building this market-based measures framework in the first place, advancing that also to a specification that can be audited, which our solution then in the end also is, helps building this trust, building this confidence in the market, and making companies double down on the solution, putting money where their mouth is, and actually doing things.
So as you're in this, so how, and even if you want to be somewhere between critical and confident, so where are we in the journey? So are we still early stage, or have we made some progress? And what are some of key barriers? Why doesn't everybody get it and do it? So what's holding us back?
Yes, I mean, we are also for quite some time already in this space. You mentioned the release of the very first GLEC version. So shipzero is also existing like for 7 years now. So we have seen quite a bit of the journey as well. And I think we are also amongst the very early ones being accredited partner at SFC. And we have done, I think, also a tremendous job and growth together with the team to support companies. However, looking at this from a global perspective, we are still very, very early, because there is still a huge way to go. We are not even close to anywhere hitting the targets or being carbon neutral in transportation around the globe. So there is the majority of things coming ahead. And I see two challenges that are critical. One is the entire policy making or the reliance on policy making. That's good and bad at the same time. So it's a little bit ambiguous. On the one hand, it is absolutely needed to have a strong and strict rule set on how to do that. On the other hand, a lot of companies in the past have said, okay, the regulation will come, so I focus just on what the regulation requires from me, and I'm not thinking any further on what's the business case for me, how can I differentiate in the marketplace, how can I drive that to my own success.
And when you was, just come in for a second, when you refer to policy making, could you say specifically which policies? That's a broad space. So what kind of policy?
True, yeah. So let's focus first of all on the regulation side. In Europe, obviously, there is the reporting that was enormously emphasized around the CSRD regulation, etc., where the reporting itself still also does not decarbonize anything.
Of course not.
It's just the very, very first step. And that's totally okay and fine to have regulation around that. You can argue about the scope and timing and whatsoever, but it led to companies being very, very focused on just this piece and not considering the rest of the value chain. And that obviously with some softening of these regulations, which you can also be a friend
omnibus
fan
and
correct, led to something that obviously then confused decision makers, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the past year at least. There's a clear catch-up basically.
Okay.
So that's good and bad at the same time and needs to be balanced. But what I see right now and also on this conference is there is much more focus on the business case of decarbonization, and that's, I think, good because that's driving and that's not going away. The second thing that you have to consider, and that we also see, is the latency with which sustainable actions or incentive systems trickle down through organizations. So the CEO might say, okay, this is a top priority for us on the agenda, but until that ends up in the incentive scheme of a procurement manager at a company, it takes at minimum 3 years, I would say. So we have this, if you consider a larger company that has an impact. Obviously, smaller companies may act a little bit faster, but usually you have this extreme latency of a couple of years until top management decides a priority, and then this goes down to really the operational decision makers who change their
and if you have no data or no decision making or data to support, to say where you are and to support any action or target setting and to be a metric for, then it won't work to begin with. So and that takes a little while to build. So this maybe on the booking claim, can you give an example? Maybe a business value conversation or business value application example?
Yeah, I can give you two different ones because this scope of customers that we are working with is so different. So one would be a medium-sized LSP that very early on engaged already in the fueling of HVO 100, even at the stage where this was not really publicly allowed, especially in Germany, but only in a few markets in Germany and in Europe, where it came to basically to the public. And they started to work with their clients and build really a green freight solution that they marketed and that they sold and successfully differentiated with that. And that's something where I see, okay, this can also be done not with tremendous resources or financial power or scale of a super huge brand. This can also be motivation and dedication to the topic to build that. And I think they have a very strong position, act as a role model for certain other companies right now, also trying to build those green freight offerings. And that's a great topic where we see that our data is basically, or our systems are powering this solution, because we are recording from the entire fleet very precisely their fueling events, putting that into a registry or an internal ledger from which they can then claim that specifically to the clients where they see market interest, commercial interest.
So do you see this loop being closed as to that these claims actually find themselves in the corporate annual reporting, which then, let's say, big firms, accounting firms say, okay, we got that, yeah, so you can write down your inventory base, yeah? Mm-hmm. Or is that already happening? Is that loop being closed, or is it still being closed more like I can see, I mean, in those ledgers, the registries that some companies have, so that it's closed there, but I think it needs to be closed one level up as well, yeah?
True. Yeah, let me give you the second example, and then I'm getting to this question. The second would be obviously the buyer side, the shipper side. And there you have usually a target setting process where you say, okay, I want to go down by 2030 by 30 or 35 or 40% of my baseline emissions that were defined at some year. So you have a clear delta that you can compute, tons of CO2e again, and you need to define how that trickles down. Now you start obviously going into, okay, what efficiency measures do we have that costs nothing or whatsoever? And quickly you will see in most of the cases that we are engaged with, it's not possible without the energy switch actually. So how to apply that fast and flexible, and then you come to these market-based measures, mechanisms which are then fundamental to the strategy. And what I see very promising is that there are processes that also create sustainable or climate budgets, sometimes separate also from the procurement budget, in also the 8 figures, so substantial. However, now we have this open question of accounting acceptance in the greenhouse gas inventory or also in the science-based targets process, basically. Yeah. And that is something that is yet creating some uncertainty, obviously, where people shy a little bit back in going all in. They have prepared, and now I think a lot of folks are desperately waiting for clarity and precision on a statement of how this all goes together. Yeah. And I can absolutely see and have highest respect for taking some time, because if you let this genie out of the bottle too early, you will not get it back in. So you have to build trust and you have to have a very sound system. But I personally would see some clarity or statement in the beginning of next year as absolutely fundamental to a successful forthcoming.
Yeah. Let's keep fingers crossed. I think you're referring, obviously, Tobias referring to the timelines of the SBTi and greenhouse gas protocol that is still, I think the carbon net zero standard is out and there's consultation, etc. So I think it's going to be interesting at what point of time, which kind of precision and specificity is to be expected. But I think the direction of travel seems to be on a good path, better than like a year ago. So I think there's more confidence building. That's great. Maybe my last question is, I mean, how do you, as you've been working together with SFC for quite a while, I mean, longer than I was at SFC, so do you have some advice for us? How we can maybe do better or do different in order to support this journey?
Oh, I think, I would say, first of all, a big shout out to the entire work the team has done and also to the incredible growth. I can recall that when I engaged, I think the first time with SFC, it was barely 10 people probably. So that's a fantastic journey to see. I think also that the topic setting of market-based measures, data exchange, especially also with the ILE protocol that's being developed, are tremendous steps in standardizing and organizing this entire process, let alone the entire work that went into the GLEC framework. I see that the community represented is still lacking one side of the discussion, and that is the carriers, also the smaller and medium-sized carriers. So the one thing, if I could make a wish, would be probably you bring together shippers, you bring together logistics service providers also of very different sizes. You bring together also policymakers, you bring together tool providers or data experts. And the thing that is a little bit underrepresented in my understanding is the carrier side as it is out in the world. So you have obviously some very large carriers, but the reality is the carrier landscape is oftentimes very fragmented, especially in road freight, very small companies. So if we get those people also at the table, I think that would be great.
I think in shipping, because with clean cargo and in aviation, with clean air transport, so I think, the carrier side is consolidated, so I think it's actually, that's very good. When it comes to bringing smaller carriers to the table, so we do struggle more, but I think that's a good push. It was great having you, so I hope our audience has been enjoying a little bit our marginally technical conversation, and was good to seeing you. Have a good time,